I want to give you some background, kind of a behind the scenes of what I do to get ready for a podcast interview. My name's Angel Tuccy. I run the Need a Guest Facebook group where I help podcast hosts find guests and guests find podcast hosts. And over the last several years, I still make it a weekly habit to get booked on 2 interviews every week. Getting in front of 2 audiences, 2 podcast interviews every single week. Make sure that I get my brand, my message, my story in front of at least 1,000 new people every single week. Talk about a game changer. I think for most businesses, we're trying to figure out, how do we get more leads? How do we generate more visibility and exposure? And here there's a whole world of podcast hosts who are looking for guests just like you. So here's some quick tips and some behind the scene things that I do to make sure that I'm always #interview ready. Number 1, do a little bit of research. Listen to a show or 2, see the host's style. Make sure that you kind of fit with their vibe so you're not taken off by surprise. And I always love to listen to just how do they introduce their guests. You can get a real feel for the vibe and the energy just by listening to that part. How do they introduce their guests? So number 1, just do a little bit of homework. While you're doing that little bit of homework, it's not a bad idea also to post, right? I'm getting ready to do an interview. I just did an interview. I just booked with this interview. Give a little publicity to them. It also creates some buzz for you. Number 2, and I had to actually write down my little notes today, right? Practice my intro, right? Like, you have an introduction. I like to write out word for word how my host can introduce me. And when I say can, remember, it's their show. Right? They get creative liberty. They get to decide how they're going to bring in their guests. But I find 8 out of 10 times when I send them, here's a great way to introduce me that sets up the topic and sets me up as the expert in the space and introduces to the audience what we're about to share. 8 out of 10 times, my host will read this verbatim. So I always want to send them, here's something you can use. Not that they have to, but they can. And like I said, 8 out of 10 times they do. But then I also just do a quick little refresh to make sure that when I say hello, right, that I'm here and I'm super excited to discuss how being a podcast guest can transform your business, is the most underserved marketing tool, is an amazing platform for business owners to get their message out. So I always want to make sure that I send them my introduction, and then I also practice. You never want to script yours. Well, actually, I take that back. You never want to read your introduction. You don't want to read out loud exactly what you're saying. Remember, a podcast interview is a dialogue. It's a conversation. But it's not a bad idea to just go through it really quickly before you go live on the air. Something else super important. Make sure my call to action link is working, or that I know where I'm going to send the audience to. Right? There's always one call to action, which means we want to ask the audience to do one thing out of every interview. Exposure without a call to action is wasted exposure. So for me, I'm always recommending the audience, if you want to connect directly with over 100 podcast hosts who are looking for guests this week, right? Sense of urgency, exactly what the result will be. Go to needaguest.com. That takes you right into my Facebook community where you can get plugged in and gain access to that free community right away. So you always want to make sure that your call to action is on par, it's working, you know where you're going to send the audience. As you're prepping, right, to get ready for that interview, just like we had to do today, we wanted to make sure it was going to be quiet on the set, right? Test your audio. Make sure you've got the link where you know how to log in to get connected with that host. They will have sent you the link, right, for how you can record with them. Test it, make sure it works. You've got good audio, good Wi-Fi, your microphone's working, you're in a quiet room. Right? You want to make sure that audio is always the number one thing when it comes to production value with a podcast. It's your voice. Right? Audio number 1, video number 2, but it's always about the audio. If the audio is bad, the whole interview, nobody's going to listen to bad audio on a podcast interview. So always make sure you've got a quiet room and good audio. So great microphone. I always say when you first start out, use what you've got. But as you become a podcast guest and you're like branding yourself as a great guest, you might want to upgrade, right? And check around, right? See what other people are recommending, and you might want to upgrade your microphone. And then my final number 1 absolute behind the scenes thing that I do to make sure that this interview goes off without a hitch, I confirm. confirm the day before. Make sure your host, like you're still on her calendar, his calendar, and then we're still good to go. Confirming is just good. It's just good business practice, right? Anytime you're meeting somebody, you're going to show up somewhere, you're going to get ready, you're going to be camera ready, you're moving things around. It's always just good business practice to confirm the day before to make sure that this interview is still getting ready to take place. If you are looking to get booked on more podcasts every single week and connect with hosts who are looking for guests, make sure you join our Facebook community at needaguest.com. And I'll see you, right? Well, I'll listen to you on your next podcast interview. Cheers.